Welcome back to Real Talk with Susan Stone and Kristina Supler. We are full-time moms and attorneys bringing our student defense legal practice to life with real, candid conversations. We are talking about ChatGPT today. As you know, Kristina and I represent students accused of misconduct, and a lot of the work we do is defending students when they're accused of cheating. And since last November, ChatGPT has been all over the news outlets, including the New York Times, talk about this is the new way students cheat. Kristina, why don't you describe what ChatGPT is?
Sure. So I don't at all profess to be a tech expert on any level, but reality has forced me to learn more about ChatGPT. It's essentially an AI tool that uses natural language processing techniques to respond to user-generated prompts. Really what you do is you ask a question or give it a prompt, and then it just replies using natural language. It's pretty fascinating.
Well, it's how students are getting around writing their own essays. They're actually putting in the prompt in the computer, and then the GPT actually spits out the essay for you.
And it's not without controversy. Places like the New York City schools have banned it. So we're here today to talk more about it.
Why don't you, with that prompt, introduce our esteemed guest?
Sure. We are joined today by Antony Aumann, who's a professor of philosophy at Northern Michigan University. He teaches courses on aesthetics, religion, existentialism. His research focuses primarily on the writings of Kierkegaard, as well as issues in contemporary philosophy of art. And recently, he's gained significant notoriety because he was featured in a New York Times article discussing our very topic today, ChatGPT. Welcome.
Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me on. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Okay, I'm going to start with the lowbrow question. Ready for this? How does a professor at Northern Michigan University who teaches philosophy and art and Kierkegaard get featured in the New York Times to talk about a tech app?
I think that it all started because I caught a student who used the chat to write an essay for my class. And yeah, there was a Facebook post by my friend who also caught someone that went viral. And they were looking for other people who had a similar story. And I was one of those people, and they liked my story.
That's crazy. So you basically, and I read about that in the New York Times, figured out that the student wrote something that just didn't seem appropriate for, was it that student or just in general?
Yeah. So it was that student. I can tell you the story. It's kind of funny. So
yeah, tell a funny story. I'm already laughing.
The student submitted an essay that was just a little bit too good to be true. Like, the grammar was perfect and the structure was just impeccably logically sound, and it was really insightful. And frankly, it was a little bit better than what most of my students are capable of. But of course, that in and of itself is a red flag, but it's not proof. So what I did is I took the student's essay and I pasted it into ChatGPT and I said, hey, did you write this? And it came back and it said there's a 99.9% chance that it did write it. And so what I did, it had like some other things. So I cut and pasted the ChatGPT thing and I emailed it back to the student. And I said, hey, you can send me a chat thing. I'm going to send you a chat thing back. What do you say about this?
Wait, did you?
Wow.
So we just were looking into this. Did you pay for it, or how did you even have it?
Yeah. So this is the same company that invented DALL-E, which was all the rage last year because it can create its art images, unique art images, original art images from any prompt that you give it. And as an artist myself, I was really fascinated by that. So when they came out with this essay writing chatbot, I was like, oh, I have to hop on this.
It's interesting. It seems like every year, 18 months, there's a new development in tech that somehow impacts significantly the academic landscape. So tell us now, what strategies are professors using to detect cheating, plagiarism?
Other than Turnitin. We know about Turnitin.
Sure.
Yeah, I have a lot to say about this, largely because I don't think that we're very good at detecting things. So there are a bunch of programs out there, including a program that has been made famous by this student, Edward Tien from Princeton University. You may have heard of him.
I read about
He
it.
has this program called GPT-0. And so you can plug the student's essay into it, and it's supposed to give you a percent chance or a likelihood that it was written by the computer rather than the student. ChatGPT has its own sort of detector too. The problem is that there's a lot of false positives, and a lot of false negatives. And even more seriously, it's actually really, really easy to circumvent the detectors. And so I'll tell you, it's actually kind of funny a little bit. So the way the detector works is it looks for regularity in thinking and writing. Computers are very regular in the organization of their thoughts. Human beings, we're kind of a little bit chaotic.
We're ADD,
And
right?
So it looks for that. But all you have to do is just insert some errors, like grammatical errors and spelling errors into it, and all of a sudden it thinks it's written by a human being.
Well, let me challenge you on this, because are there acceptable uses that students can take that software and maybe it helps them create an outline or think of words that they wouldn't have? I mean, can you use it as a learning tool?
100%. And in my other media appearances, I've been touting its positive use as a tool to help students learn, help students how to write. So for me, there's like a big gulf between like naughty uses of it and non-naughty uses of it. So like the bad use is just to cut and paste the essay that the chat wrote and present it as your own. But I'll tell you what I do, which is, so I'll write a rough draft of something, I'll submit it to the chat, and I'll ask it for feedback. Hey, what are some potential objections that I need to consider? What are some grammatical errors that I need to fix? And the chat often has really good things to say. And then I'll do the work of incorporating them myself. And I think that's a totally acceptable way for my students to use it.
Do you think, I'm going to give an art example. My high schooler wants to go into art design. She's really interested in illustration. And she asked me a very interesting question. And what you talked about, your use of the tools in art, she's like, Mom, do you think I'm going to go to art school and my job will be taken over by computers and there will be no need for original art? And of course I said no, because you always need human creativity. But am I wrong in saying that? Will her job be taken over? Will we need writers, or will it all be created by computers?
That's
scary.
The big question. I think the art question is a little bit easier to answer, partly because I have skin in the game. My wife is a graphic designer.
Oh, I love this. I love this.
So there's still a need for human beings when it comes to taste. Dolly is the name of the program that the same company puts out that'll generate the art images for you. But it generates a wide range of images, and some of them are good and some of them are horrible. You still need, and some of them might be good, but not good for that client. So you still need someone who has a good kind of aesthetic sensibility to figure out, okay, which of these things are helpful, which of these things are good or bad, what are going to reach people, what isn't going to reach people. And so maybe the role of the graphic designer is going to shift a little bit, but that's not going to go away. And I think there's always going to be people who want, clients who want a personal touch. And Dolly can't give you that.
Could Dolly create a Disney character?
Absolutely.
That's interesting.
But you're going to need someone to figure out which Disney character is worth preserving and which one it wouldn't. It'll give you 100 Disney characters.
That's really interesting. Susan and I, given the work that we do working with students across the country of all different ages, we speak with a lot of educators, and particularly in higher ed. And we're regularly involved in this discussion about students and pressure and work ethic. And some people say, oh, students, they just don't want to work anymore. There's some laziness. And it seems to me, Susan, wouldn't you agree that there's also maybe a counter argument that professors who are recycling tests year after year and essay prompts, kind of lazy too. I mean,
right. And before ChatGPT, and I'm dating this back to when I went to college, there have always been test banks housed by different sports organizations and Greek organizations. So if you were taking Professor Aumann's class, you could access his test for 20 years. And, maybe Professor Aumann needs to change his test theory.
propose advocating for cheating, but I sort of think it can cut both ways.
Right, right. How about challenging students a little differently, Professor?
So I guess I have a couple of things to say. I don't think my students are lazy. I just don't.
Good.
I think they're stressed.
Thank you. I think that's really important for students to hear that.
They're overworked. My students have 1, 2 jobs. They're trying to learn how to become adults. They're taking a really heavy load of classes. Maybe they're also on a sports team. And that's just like a lot of pressure when you're 18 or 19 years old. I mean, yeah, of course there are lazy people who exist in the world, but I like any kind of generalization about kids these days, that just doesn't fly with me. But by the same token, like, we as professors are also overtaxed, like the amount of administrative stuff we have to do. And I'm supposed to write another book and coming up with those tests. I think that you don't appreciate just like the astronomical amount of work that goes into it. And yeah, we're going to have to write new things going forward, but like, we're all really, really stressed.
That's very helpful because a lot of people don't know what faces higher ed. And so there's a reason that you write that one test and it's a great test and you want to use it for year to year to free you up to do other creative work. Okay. Can I just offer, and you tell me what you think, a lowbrow solution to this problem?
Ooh, I'm curious to hear.
I like the low-hanging fruit, Supler. You know that. What's wrong with just having kids come in, hand them a little essay book, ask them a question, and have them handwrite an essay response to a test?
Yeah, what a crazy idea. I can't imagine an educational environment with those conditions.
Yeah, you want to go old school? I'll tell you 2 reasons why that's not going to work.
Please.
The first reason it's not going to work is that it made sense in perhaps your generation and my generation, where we were raised to write by hand. We were trained to write cursive. This generation of students didn't have that kind of training, and very few of my students can write neatly and quickly for any length of time at all. So that's just like a practical concern. They just can't do it. The second thing is a bigger thing.
That's a mic drop.
I apologize for interrupting you.
That's a mic drop.
That has literally never occurred to me. And I think it's really obvious, but yet it didn't occur to me. And I think it's really insightful that just the handwriting barriers and challenges in our tech age now, students can't write and write and write.
You know what? The special ed attorney in me is very upset about that because you get specific brain function development by handwriting. And so what are we doing? But keep going. I'm like,
that's never occurred to me. And that's really interesting to think of.
Shocking.
So the bigger thing is I'm not sure that just by having all of our assignments be handwritten in class, we're really teaching students how to write in the way that we want to write. What that really exercises is your like speed, journalistic abilities. But real writing is like taking your time to think about exactly what word is the right word and revising and revising and revising. And you just don't have the time to do that in the classroom. That's not what's going on there.
So what's the solution?
I have a utopian vision.
Okay.
Share it with us, please.
We're getting all Walden-esque here.
Yeah. Well, I think that school has become, for lots of reasons that aren't bad reasons, a lot of hoop jumping. And maybe the dawn of ChatGPT is going to remove all of that hoop jumping because now, of course, the chat can just jump through them for us. And maybe eventually we'll return to what school ought to be about, which is love of learning for learning's own sake.
You took the next question out of my mouth. Really. And it's funny because, Kristina, last night we were talking about this, that I would have never used ChatGPT. I've done a lot of soul searching and thinking back to me as a human being, but I didn't go to school with pressure from my parents to get the A.
Well, I would say that, I mean, regardless of family external pressure for performance, for me, I too would like to think that if I were a student now, I wouldn't succumb to these temptations. But I also don't have any I didn't go to college in a time when, there was such easy, quick access to data.
Yeah.
Literally at my fingertips everywhere. And so, again, I'm not condoning or justifying cheating, plagiarism, any academic cutting of corners. But I also recognize that students now, it's just a really different time in education. And I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on how professors should adjust their teaching style to just be cognizant of the changing reality of the technology that is, ever present?
Well, especially since we don't like the pen and paper type solution.
I think that you have to lean into it. I would tell you, if you were a student and you're like, you would never use it, I think you're making a big mistake. Yeah, it's a tool that can be used for evil, but it's also a tool that can be used for good. And that tool is going to exist out there, whether we like it or not. The second the student graduates or leaves the halls of my classroom or whatever else, they're going to be using it. Their next employer is going to be asking them to use it. So we have a responsibility to teach them how to use it well, rationally, competently in the classroom. So I think that's where I'm going to as a teacher.
Can we talk about, you do teach religion, God? We are seeing a lot of cheating cases. Our practice started 1 or 2 a year, and now that aspect of our practice is almost weekly. We get an inquiry. I've been accused of cheating. Do you think students have lost a fear of God? And I'm not just talking about ChatGPT, but just cheating in general. Do we need more God in our lives to keep us more on the straight and narrow?
I don't know. It's this.
You are a religion professor. We're going deep.
Yeah, I don't know. Certainly, God provides a powerful motivation to do good. If you believe that God is watching, or that God will reward you or punish you, or if not God, karma, like that does give you an extra incentive. But I don't know if somehow humanity has gotten worse as religion recedes to the background in our society. I don't think my students are somehow worse human beings because they're less religious than they were a generation ago.
Are they less religious?
They're less affiliated with institutional religion. And that's pretty well established with empirical data. We can ask people if they affiliate with some kind of institutional religion. We can ask them how often they go to worship services. And there has been a really marked downturn in that, at least in the United States, since the 1950s and 60s.
Why?
I don't know. I mean, that's an interesting question. One thing to say is that there is a correlation between being religious and facing difficult times financially, personally, health-wise, and whatever else. And this is true not just in the United States, but across the world. The least religious countries in the world are these Scandinavian countries, which have the highest standards of living. In the United States, the least religious states are the ones with the highest standards of living. The most religious ones are the ones with the least. So you might think that as standards of living go up, people's felt need for some kind of security blanket diminishes. That's one explanation. I'm not saying it's the best.
Yeah, you know what's interesting about that? I remember going to a lecture and they said there's atheist in a foxhole. And that when you're facing a military situation or a crisis, even the most pronounced atheist will say, "Dear God, help me." And why, so that's really interesting that we lose that sense of, and I'm not saying God in any particular religion. I like how you included karma, but do we lose gratitude when things are good?
Yeah, I think there's a lack of gratitude there, but I will say a flip side of us becoming less religious is that I do think that we are looking for peace of mind in the face of the anxiety that modern life brings upon us. And so there does seem like an increased interest in spiritual practices like meditation, like mindfulness, that are, if not our Western religions of old, still quasi-religious, because they help us on another front, even if it's not like I'm in a fox.
Do you feel, I want to connect back to a comment that you made earlier in this episode about when we were discussing laziness in students, and you said that students just have a lot of pressure, both externally and in the school environment. Do you think that, what are your thoughts about the amount of pressure that higher ed institutions are placing on students? Do you think it's the right amount? Do you think it's too much pressure? I mean, what are your thoughts on the realities of many students who are struggling to get by and paying their way through school, but also you're in college to learn and struggle with tough concepts and master skills?
I don't know, Kristina. Are we in college to learn, or do we go to college so we can get a career and get a good job? Because college now is around $80,000 a year in some institutions, and I want to challenge that notion. You can learn by going to an art museum, you can learn by reading a book, but are we going to college so we can get a job?
I think that that's a little bit of both, right? I mean, if I ask my students, yes, to some degree, they're there just because they want a piece of paper so they get a good job. And especially with the cost of education on their minds, I think that that's like an extra stressor just to focus on the good grades. But I don't think that we can say it's just like one or the other, even in any individual student. I think a lot of them, when they have a good class with a good professor, will say to me like, oh yeah, like I really learned something in this class, even if I won't use it. And to be honest, most of the classes I teach in philosophy or religion are not directly related to the jobs that these students will have when they graduate.
European history major here with a degree from a very, very expensive institution. I loved my college years. No bearing or relevance whatsoever to my job. But it was an enjoyable 4-year time.
And I had a very practical undergraduate education that I use every day. So do college students have a sense of self? I mean, are they spiritual beings or are they nihilists?
Ooh. Big question.
Has anyone else asked you that on a podcast, huh, Professor?
I think that a lot of them have those nihilistic worries, and maybe it's tied to the lack of religion, because religion isn't just solace in difficult times. It also gives us a sense of purpose and direction in our lives. It tells us why are we here and what are we supposed to be doing and where are we going and why does it all matter? And so if you lose a lot of that, and when is the time then people really have their religious doubts? Late adolescence, early adulthood, that's when a lot of it sets in. And so I ask a lot of my students, does nothing matter anymore? And I think a lot of them will admit that they worry about that. But I think within that like overwhelming worry, there's a lot of them still trying to carve out some sense of significance in their lives and hoping for that.
Would the temptation to cheat be reduced if we could regain in students a sense of purpose and self?
I don't know. I think that a lot of crimes are crimes of opportunity.
That's what Kristina says.
I totally agree. Just as an aside, I have a background in criminal defense. And yes, I agree with that 100%.
That's what we were talking about last night, getting ready for this podcast.
Well, that forces you to think about it a little bit. You're like, oh, I have to go through all this work to cheat. I have to find it, someone who will write the paper for me and pay them. But if it's just like, it's free and it'll take you 30 seconds. I don't know if even that reflects as much on students' characters as cheating did in the past, where it was a lot of work. It now seems more like an impulsive action by a stressed out individual.
What other thoughts do you have on this topic? Because you have such an interesting perspective that you'd like to share with parents out there listening to this podcast.
And I like that a lot of your feedback is not just solely rooted in how dare they and the judgment because let's face it, in my opinion, that's not helpful. So I'm really grateful for a discussion that is considering more in the bigger picture.
It's not to treat them as human beings, just to look at it. I also think that that's like just all those professors out there that just want to play cop and catch the students who are cheating. I really think that that's naive, that this technology exists whether we like it or not. It's going to be out there. Students are going to be using it. Again, we have an obligation as parents, as teachers, to help our students learn how to use it well, rather than just say it's forbidden fruit.
Any other thoughts? Because I just love that.
I think that's well said, though, the analogy, it's forbidden fruit. I guess what words of advice or encouragement would you have for those stressed out students?
I love that. Good question.
Talk to your professors. I think that most of us are pretty understanding human beings if you continue to keep the lines of communication open. What I don't like is the student who just drops off and doesn't talk to me at all. If you're saying, hey, I'm stressed out, I can't do it today, I need an extension, I'm more than happy to provide that. Now, not everybody's like that, but I think most of us are pretty understanding human beings. We're not the boogeymen that some students worry that we are.
I wish that I would have had the opportunity to take your class, you know? So I really appreciate you coming on. And I know you've been exploding since. Tell us about how your career's changed since the New York Times article.
I have to think it's been a whirlwind, right? I mean, all of a sudden, your name is everywhere.
There's been a lot of media appearances, and it's been fun. It's been nice, but it's hard to do that and continue to do my regular job. It's not like all of a sudden I don't have to teach. And so what gives on that front is my personal life. It continues to be hard to have work-life balance. And, without an incredible wife who's happy to support me and love me, even while I come home stressed out at the end of the night, I don't know if I'd get through this.
Is this going to change your career?
Or do you have new thoughts for research?
Sure.
I don't know. I don't think so.
Or is that confidential?
Yeah.
I tried to send President Biden an email telling him I would head up his ChatGPT task force, but he didn't get back to me.
He was busy last night, but maybe today. Check your email.
Check your
Yeah, right.
Well, thank you.
This was really such a pleasure. We laughed. We talked about technology. We talked about religion and philosophy. We covered it all.
I was going to say, is there anything we didn't cover?
No, I think this is great. It was so much fun. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Real Talk with Susan and Kristina. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our show so you never miss an episode. And leave us a review so other people can find the content we share here. You can follow us on Instagram. Just search our handle @StoneSupler. And for more resources, visit us online at studentdefense.kjk.com. Thank you so much for being a part of our Real Talk community. We'll see you next time.